Okay, well, welcome everybody to the Commercial Real Estate Library podcast. I'm Stefan Morissette, Vice President at Colliers International. I'm your West Coast host of the podcast, and with me today is Beau Jarvis. Beau has been in the real estate industry for just about 20 years. Started off as a broker and then moved on to the Vice President of Acquisitions and Development at one of the largest residential and commercial developers in Vancouver. And then in 2014, he joined Wesgroup and quickly climbed the ranks, and last year became President of Wesgroup. He's also the chair of the Urban Development Institute and father of 5 children. And as we were just chatting about, I've got 2 young guys myself, and I don't know how you do it working from home with 5 kids, but I respect it for sure. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so, I always like to start off by asking, people what's their story. So, you started off as a broker, moved on to another developer, and now you're with Wesgroup. So kind of how did you get from where you started to where you are today, would you say?
That's a bit of a long story. I'll try and shorten it as much as possible, but abbreviate it. I was a broker. I was born and raised in Whistler, British Columbia. So that is, I'm one of about 5 people my age who was actually born and raised there. And my family my mother actually opened the first real estate office in Whistler, the very first one, with a couple other people. And my father kind of was in construction, built spec homes, carpenter, that type of thing. Small kind of subdivision development type stuff, nothing major at all. So I was kind of around it all my life. During university, I worked for a civil contracting company called Whistler Excavations. So I was a pipe layer. So I've just always been around real estate and construction. I was either on a job site or in the back of my mom's Volvo growing up while she was showing real estate. And so I became, after a failed attempt to join the tech sector during sort of the .com craze, I kind of ran with my tail between my legs back home to Whistler and joined my mother selling real estate. So in Whistler, you're a jack of all trades. There was no real commercial representation from companies like yourselves, Colliers, CBRE, Cushman, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was left to the smaller real estate firms in the Sea to Sky corridor, namely Squamish, Whistler, and Pemberton, to be jack of all trades. So you sold a multi-million-dollar single family home, you did a retail lease, you did an industrial lease, and you sold development land. And so I had a listing for a townhome site in Squamish, and it was a very bad time in the market, actually, in the Sea to Sky corridor. In fact, I don't think I had generated a commission in 10 months.
Oh, wow.
I had a newborn baby, and I had recently taken out a second mortgage on my property to pay the first mortgage. And so I was, and so one night I was sitting there studying my listing for this townhome site in Squamish, because I was going to go to the city the next day and meet with some folks, David Evans from Cressy and Chris Evans from Ani, and they've both moved on and they're doing different things now. But I wanted to go down, and I had to sell this site. So I had a bottle of tequila and my newborn upstairs and my wife sleeping in this highly mortgaged house. And I drove to Vancouver the next day, determined to try and sell this piece of land. Met with Cressy first, and they declined, and I met with Ani second, and they wrote an offer and then offered me a job. And I turned them down first because I was, again, born and raised in Whistler, so I skied till like noon, and then went into the office and did some real estate. That could possibly be part of the reason I hadn't generated a commission in 10 months. Yeah, so they made the offer better, and we moved to Vancouver, and I joined Ani, started in acquisitions and development, and in their sort of the next sort of 8 or 9 years at Ani was just that astronomical kind of growth phase, and we were just incredibly aggressive, and there's just a lot of young people there that were really ambitious and entrepreneurial, and we saw everything, we did everything, we weren't afraid of anything. And it was a breeding ground for sort of education and real estate development and real estate in general. There was a saying going around for a while that 2 years at Ani was anywhere else, or 1 year anywhere else in that decade, in terms of experience gained. And then, moved over to Wesgroup, started as, overseeing all their development, and kind of quickly started taking over portfolios within Wesgroup, sales and marketing, construction, interior design, etc. And then last year, moved into the role of president of the organization and overseeing kind of all of the operations at Wesgroup with certainly with a very good team. I wouldn't be overseeing anything without the team that I have surrounding me. So that's kind of an abbreviated version of the story. There's all kinds of weird things that happen in between that probably are too much for this podcast to handle. Yeah. Maybe a different podcast. I feel like maybe Howard Stern would be suited to hear about some of that stuff.
Yeah, well, hopefully you got rid of that second mortgage on that house. I guess you moved to Vancouver, so you did. But...
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I was able to pay that off.
Awesome. Well, that's quite the story. So I guess switching gears to Wesgroup, they've been family owned and operated for 50 years with, Peter obviously being the founder and patriarch. Can you tell a bit of the story for the audience, maybe out east or elsewhere, who isn't familiar with Wesgroup, of who you are as a company and what your focus is?
Sure, yeah. Typical of a lot of the privately held real estate development companies in the city of Vancouver, immigrant family moved to Vancouver, and just kind of used their hands, built things, and built houses, single family houses, and this was Peter Wesseck's father. And then Peter, his father was involved in construction and sort of building and things like that, but Peter really, I wouldn't say he started, at second or third base or anything like that. It was very modest what he started with, and he really, he was a lawyer, and he was in real estate and transactions in terms of his legal practice, and I think saw a lot of that with his background in construction and real estate, having grown up around it, and really just started investing in assets. And he was, certainly a risk taker. I think he still is a risk taker. Yeah. Grew his sort of small, modest portfolio over time into a very significant portfolio. And then along the way, engaged in what we'll call merchant activity. So he and a partner bought Park Lane Homes, which at the time was one of the largest single-family home builders in Canada. And they morphed that into, continued on for a long time with single family out in the suburbs, but also got into the multifamily game, et cetera. Fast forward to around, and Wesgroup is a fully vertically integrated real estate development company. So we have in-house construction, in-house property management, in-house interior design, sales, marketing. We just have the volume to be able to, where it makes sense to bring those services in-house, where some don't have all of those services in-house. And we also engage in all facets of real estate. So our portfolio is made up of industrial, retail, office, purpose-built rental, and then we obviously engage in merchant activity, and we'll build anything that is real estate. So high-rise, low-rise, concrete, wood frame, townhomes, single family, wherever there's an opportunity, we like to say we'll make sense of it. So that's kind of Wesgroup, and fast forward to today, where we're one of the largest privately held real estate development companies in Western Canada, and we're a going concern, I guess. So that's kind of Wesgroup in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's a great summary. I've been working in the industry for just about 13 years, done a bunch of work with you guys, and have such a fantastic brand and reputation. One thing that I've noticed is what the company doesn't really shy away from is the quote unquote brownfield or environmentally contaminated sites on the larger scale of things that might take 5, 10, 15 years to come to fruition. Pacific Link Industrial Park comes to mind. I've done a bunch of business in there. and obviously in South Vancouver, one of the largest master plan residential communities, in the city that's happening right now. What would you say is the thinking behind that? And, again, you mentioned Peter's a risk taker. I assume that plays into it. But, is that still your strategy going forward? And, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so we definitely, and there's a long history, certainly before I arrived as well, of that sort of philosophy of really getting involved in what I'll call hairier deals, right? Where they're brownfield, as you say, highly contaminated, or just really complex from a planning perspective, a financing perspective, or whatever. And I think that Peter, I think that was sort of a strategy from the outset for him, or perhaps, it wasn't even a strategy by design, but just how he is. He was attracted to those types of deals. He perhaps saw, he saw an angle, saw a way to navigate through the various issues that a lot of other people would sort of shy away from or deem as too risky. And what comes with a lot of risk in many cases, not always, but in many cases is higher reward. And so that's being certain. And as you do that over a period of time, you get more comfortable with a lot of these things. You come to understand how there are very typical ways to navigate through them. And so we definitely continue that practice today, where we are very attracted to the more complex real estate deals, transactions, more complex pieces of land, and we find a way. We like to think that we have a level of expertise in navigating our way through those types of deals and opportunities. So that is at the core of who we are in terms of how we operate in the marketplace. So very much a key strategy today.
Awesome.
And it will be moving forward.
For sure. Touching on the office side of things, you guys own and manage 1 million square feet of office space, and obviously want to kind of get into the COVID side of things here. I should note it's September 9th that we're recording this, so we're 8 months into the pandemic locally. How are you seeing the office side perform? You're working from home. I'm in the office today for the first time in a month, but I'm working from home for the most part. What is your take on the office market overall? Are you still in the acquisition mode on office? Or are you guys going to, pull back a little bit? What are your thoughts on the office market?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And to be honest, it's a tough question to answer, because I think that, long term, I see our office market operating in a fairly stable way. I mean, I don't think that I know there's a lot of talk right now. There's a lot of declarations by large organizations saying, we're going remote, and we're done with office space and all this kind of stuff. I think that for me, it comes down to the human condition, and humans desire interaction, face-to-face, collaboration, and connection. And I don't think that you can get all three of the aforementioned in this format that you and I are currently working in, right? On a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting. I just, you can't get that. And so my belief is that we'll find a vaccine for COVID. We'll work through this issue, and, life will kind of go back to normal. And there's going to be that desire to, be in that office space, connecting with your colleagues, collaborating in person, and moving forward with initiatives. So I see, and I could be wrong, right? Like, oh God, I've been wrong so many times before with sort of predictions in the marketplace. But I see COVID as sort of a little bit of a distraction in terms of the overall office market, in terms of supply and demand dynamics, in terms of, companies like Amazon and how they're, going to be one of the biggest tenants, if not the biggest tenants in our downtown core, and what that means for, our economy and the spin-offs for demand and office space and things like that. So that's the prediction part of your question. In terms of what we're doing, I would say that, we're opportunistic, right? So we try and balance our portfolio. And so right now, actually, our portfolio is not necessarily balanced. We're trying to grow our purpose-built rental component
Okay.
of the portfolio. But that said, if there's an office opportunity that we deem as viable, we will chase it down, like no tomorrow. We have between Mount Pleasant, New Westminster, I guess mostly there, we have over 1.5 million square feet of office, and call it in Mount Pleasant the I-1, I-2, the quasi-industrial stuff, but we got over 1.5 million square feet of office yet to build in our portfolio and in our development pipeline. So we're still obviously bullish on the market to a degree, but I can't say to you, we're out there seeking office mandates on SkyTrain stations in Burnaby right now. But if there's an opportunity in office, we're there to have a look at it.
Yeah, you're basically saying that the sky isn't falling as some people do predict. And yeah, you hear about Twitter and all these groups saying we're going to be remote forever. But to your point, I was in here today with a mask on, and I walked around both floors, and I talked to about 11 different brokers, and caught up with everybody. Had a good time, and also talked about a few different deals that may have not been chatted about if I wasn't in the office. So I'm long-term bullish and eager to be in the office more often when I can be, when there's a vaccine. So I definitely agree.
And if anybody's out there like me, like I need to get the hell out of my house and down to the office to focus and work and go for a decent lunch or a coffee or whatever, right? Like I'm being a little bit facetious, but I do think that working from home, I do see that there being a desired flexibility by some to have the opportunity to work from home on occasion as it suits them. We're already having people in our organization ask for that flexibility. So I see that as something, but I don't think that's going to diminish the need for office space.
Yeah, I actually totally agree. Switching over to the retail side, I guess a lot of the retail owned by you guys is in kind of a mixed use, ground floor capacity, but how has your retail been performing? And, what are your thoughts on the retail market as well?
Retail is something that in our portfolio, the vast majority of it is definitely ancillary to a predominant use in a building. So for example, retail at the base of a residential tower or building, retail at the base of an office building. We do have a couple of small shopping center, not large by any means, but or we have retail that is, it's a redevelopment play. So predominantly the retail in our portfolio is made up of what I just described. I wouldn't say that we're incredibly bullish on retail. And that's been, I would say that that's been the case for, a decade now. I think that there are absolutely opportunities in retail, and there always will be in certain locations and for certain uses, but we're obviously seeing a shift, out there. And COVID has really, brought that, has really shed light on that, right? As stores are closing down as a result of people not being able to go out in public, or you're isolating or whatever, and you still have a desire to shop, or you still have needs, and you're really doing that online, right? And so I think it's really demonstrated that even for those that are core, I'm not an online shopper, right? I would way rather go into a store, try something on, have a quick transaction and call it a day. But even for someone like me, I'm getting more used to online shopping, right? And so I really think that can't be ignored in terms of the future of the real estate market as it pertains to retail. But I do think that there will always be opportunities in retail, right? Like the dentist needs to locate somewhere. The insurance brokerage needs to locate somewhere. The chiropractor, like service retail, right? Like there's always a need for that type of commercial amenity. But so our portfolio, the retail function is actually, we're not doing too poorly. Again, probably because we don't have too much of it as compared to others. But it's not something that we're, I would say, actively hunting.
Okay, interesting. We touched on this before the podcast started, but you're the chair of UDI. Right before this, I was watching the UDI luncheon, which was in January 30th of this year. It was very interesting to watch your take on the market, and obviously the biggest challenge I think with everybody in the development community is the regulatory bodies and the amount of challenges that come with that. So touching on the res side, obviously the focus has been on, from governments, diminishing the demand to try to lower prices. But when a house costs, 1.3 million, it goes down to 1.2. Is that affordable? Well, no. So the issue everyone seems to have is on the supply side. January of this year, that was an issue. It was an issue last year. I imagine it's only gotten worse with COVID and things being stagnated and slowed down. I'm just curious, what is your take on the UDI side, being the chair, and has anything improved, and where are we going moving forward on the res side, do you think?
Yeah, so I'll try and answer. You asked a few questions there. So, I mean, from a policy perspective and a regulatory regime, has anything improved? I think absolutely the answer is no. I think that we are at an inflection point in time right now where it's like a perfect storm of some of the most complex issues that we're all trying to engage on and solve. So we have a housing affordability crisis. We have a climate crisis. We have Indigenous reconciliation that's in crisis. We have, an inequality crisis. We're all trying to work on this and collaborate on this and engage and develop policies to help figure this out. And the issue is the policies, not only are they clashing with one another, they're not, it's how do you prioritize that, right? So, so drill down to housing, and the same thing's happening. So, locally and with housing. So for example, heritage, people want to save heritage, right? They want to, and it's really important, and it is really important, right? I agree. But so now there's policies it's really important to develop policy to save our heritage. The urban tree canopy in the city of Vancouver, extremely important to save the urban tree canopy. We got to develop policies to do that. We have to enact these policies. Zero emissions. We want to be zero emissions and zero GHG emissions and zero carbon by 20 whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Let's develop policies. Let's do all that. Oh, we have a housing crisis. So when you try to navigate through the regulatory regime and deliver affordable housing, which seems to be a high priority based on all the levels of government's, election platforms. Do we have a tree crisis? Do we have a heritage crisis? Do we have a building shadowing crisis? Yeah. Or do we have a housing crisis, right? Which crisis do we have, and how do we prioritize that? So again, for all of those reasons and the sort of the examples I just gave, it's never been more difficult or more challenging, certainly in my time, to deliver housing to meet demand, right? It's just when you're taking up to 6 years to turn the first key on a unit of housing, whether it be social housing, under market rental, luxury condominium, when it takes 6 years to turn the first key to get that supply to market, it's just like, it's egregious. Yeah. And so from a UDI perspective, we're having a very difficult time trying to advocate for policy that would help, alleviate the affordability crisis. And it's hard, right? Like, because there's a lack of trust. We're the big bad developer. We're UDI is a developer, representative lobby group, whatever you want to call it. And so, of course the developers are going to say increase the supply. Of course the developers are going to say this or that. So, there's a trust issue, and that's on the development community. Frankly, I think that the development community could have done a much better job of advocating for itself, during the good times when it wasn't so problematic. And when I say that, I mean that, the developers are the ones that have been delivering all the community centers and financing new swimming pools and hockey rinks and infrastructure, new sewage pump stations, all this kind of stuff. Yet, the average person on the street thinks it's their tax dollars at work. But it's not necessarily, right? And so, but the industry hasn't done a good job of explaining that and educating either, right? So it's on us. So I think it's never been worse in terms of trying to navigate that. So that's kind of the UDI front. On the residential, just the market side of things and supply and demand and things like that. I go to some easy stats from a pre-sale perspective. So pre-sale condominiums, townhomes, pre-sale homes. I think it's 2016, 17, and 18, the average pre-sales absorption in the lower mainland of BC was about 17,000 units a year. In 2019, it was about 7,500 units. So dramatically reduced. And then in 2020 so far, I think, about 2 months ago, we were talking about it being about 2,400 units of absorption on the pre-sale market. So, we are the supply is by virtue of that going to be limited as we move forward, right? And a lot of that has to do with it has to do with a ton of government intervention. Certainly in 2019, right? Government intervention definitely slowed the market down, and then obviously COVID and a worldwide pandemic and economic crisis to boot really has hammered us in 2020. So, I do think that supply is a major issue. And, I just got out of a big workshop that's produced by CMHC and Generation Squeeze. And there was like 50 people from all, university professors, non-market housing providers, and myself and one other development community representative. And it's so interesting to see a group of people as diverse as that try to find common ground, right? Because it's like ideals and pragmatism, and they just and there's the side of it where government, all housing should be subsidized, housing should be socialized. And then it's sort of like, well, where's the money going to come from for that? Yeah. And, well, we'll raise taxes, or, and it's just, and I think oftentimes, and again, everybody will say, oh, it's of course what the developer will say. I think that we sort of forget about this age-old science called economics. Yeah. And one of the core principles of economics, as it relates to price, being supply and demand. And, an anecdotal sort of component of supply and demand, sort of proving this, centuries-old theory, is unfolding as we speak in the West End of Vancouver, where the city of Vancouver created the West End Plan, and they, in order to go and build a condominium tower or whatever, you had to deliver inclusionary housing, and there's also a high level of requirement for rental housing that's purpose-built and things like that. And so it took 10 years, but now a lot of that product is, being delivered. It's coming to fruition. The plan's coming to fruition. And so there's a whole bunch of older assets, as you well know, in the West End, purpose-built rental assets, whether it's walk-up wood frame or even old high-rises and things like that. We happen to own a few of them. But what's happening is a lot of people are jumping to the newer product. And in many cases, they're happy to pay more for it. And so what's happening with the older product? Well, vacancy is increasing, and we're having to lower our rents. And so the laws of supply and demand are alive and well in the West End of Vancouver. And sometimes it's oh, of course the developer is going to say that, or supply, it's always supply is the answer. But I it is the answer. And of course, there's many other aspects like income growth as it relates to the cost of housing. The gap has increased dramatically over the last couple of decades, et cetera, right? There's income inequality and there's a lot of different things at play. But the fact, like there are many studies out there that tie the cost of housing to the regulatory regime in which that housing exists, right? And we operate in an intense regulatory regime, intense, like nonsensical in many cases. And look at our cost of housing, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, that's a very long-winded answer to your question, and I kind of went all over the place, but I hope I answered it.
No, it's some great insights, and I'm a huge believer in increasing supply, and I'm not a developer, but looking at friends and my sister and I have 2 kids and 3 nephews, it's like, where are they going to be able to live anywhere near me in 15 to 20 years if they don't get given $500,000 to be able to buy their first condo? And on the rental side, rental rates are going to get so out of hand if we don't build more of it to a point where it's just not even affordable. And these talk about Amazon, you're going to have a few thousand people making 6 figures moving to the city, and they're going to all need to live somewhere as well. So I hope it gets better, and it's going to take a long time, but obviously through hard work that you guys are doing at UDI, hopefully that improves it and moves the needle a little bit sooner than later, for sure. I want to talk a little bit about the industrial side, my asset class, and my favorite type of real estate. You guys own 1.7 million square feet of existing product to date, but you also have 70 acres of land still to develop. Obviously, I would be bullish on the industrial side, but I'm curious your take on things and what do you see happening in your portfolio on the industrial market?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it yourself. Industrial is your favorite real estate. It's one of my favorite real estate categories as well, or asset classes. I think that there's so much I can say about industrial. I mean, industrial had to move in terms of the market, right? It was this sort of you could build it for cheap. You had lease rates in the single digits for years, like decades. Yeah. And a lot of the operators, the lease cost was a fraction of their overall operating costs, right? And so a lot of people invested in industrial, and certainly like the BDs and Anis and ourselves and Beaus and Concert, like all these organizations invested in industrial because it was a very quite a basic operating model. It was simple to build. It was fairly straightforward. Usually you were buying zoned land, right? You're not having to take it through a major rezoning. So the timeline to execute and have your asset up and running was short. And then, operating it was also quite simple. It is still quite simple, right? It really operates itself. It's not like, it's not like a rental building where you're dealing with all kinds of different personalities and renters and things like that. So, fast forward to where we are today, and industrial's through the roof. Lease rates are, easy double digits in almost all markets or submarkets in the Lower Mainland. The cost to build industrial has gone up significantly, and the tenants, there's certainly some lack of ability to pay some of these new rates, but I would say for the most part, certainly some operators that are medium and large, there's no real choice. And again, it was really a fraction of their operating costs previously. So, based on all of the aforementioned, we are absolutely bullish in the industrial market long term. And we're a port city, right? And also, like, you look at from a land perspective, we're so constrained, right? We have geographically, we have the mountains, we have the water, and we have the agricultural land reserve. And so there is very, very little industrial land left that has not been, executed on, for lack of a better way of put it. And so that by virtue of that, it's going to, it really stabilizes and buoys the market as well. And so, I love the industrial market for all the reasons I just mentioned. I would love to find more opportunities in the industrial market, but they're few and far between. And obviously there's the strata kind of component that's been driving up land costs. And, we haven't quite played in that arena yet in terms of industrial strata. It's not that we wouldn't do it. I just sometimes question. I feel like we're a little bit late to the game, to be honest. There's some great operators that are doing industrial strata that have been for a long time. BD, Conwest, these types of guys, and they bought their land well, and now you're seeing some numbers that are pretty crazy. And how deep is that market? Because the big users, they don't want that asset on their balance sheet. The medium-sized users are mostly reinvesting in their operation, and so it's a lot of medium to small bay that are kind of the buyers. And so how deep is that? But people are definitely making it work and doing really well at it. But that's sort of a component that we haven't dipped our toes in to a great extent yet. But I love industrial. I love it long term. I love it short term for all those reasons.
Obviously, I've been in the industrial game for 13 years, and it's treated me well, and I definitely am bullish on it going forward. And I think there's still room for growth on the rental rate side. Like you talked about on the balance sheet, it's usually a low single-digit percentage of overall costs. So if it goes from $8 a foot to $12 a foot, which it has over the last 3 or 4 years, you're only really seeing an increase of a fraction percentage on the balance sheet. And the other side of this is, I think, going forward, as retail switches to more direct to consumer, groups that are used to paying $20-$30 a foot on a retail big box, footprint, can go now pay 12 or 13 for a 32-foot clear warehouse. And that's why I think you're seeing all these larger Amazon and the likes lease so much space. They just did another 400,000 square feet apparently in Richmond and 100 and something thousand in Langley. Amazon did, and so I just think that that's going to keep pushing rates up and keep it going forward. You touched on the constrained land supply we have in Vancouver, which kind of segues into the next question, which is multi-story. So, typically we've seen on the strata side, office on one level, or industrial on the first couple levels, office on a couple levels. But on the bigger side of things, Oxford's now doing a 700,000 square foot building in South Burnaby, and I believe you guys are looking at it in Coquitlam. What are your thoughts on multi-story industrial with the constrained land supply here?
I think that you're going to see multi-story warehouse industrial become more prevalent. I don't think that we have an option at this point in time to not do that, and if we're to meet the demand that exists out there, and I think will continue to exist. We have an active development permit application in Coquitlam for multi-story industrial, and it's very like industrial. Although it's simple and bread and butter, it's also like there's a high, people don't like change, and so you really got to have a well thought out strategy if you're going to go multi-story industrial. You got to think about your vertical circulation. Are you allowing trucks to go up on the second floor on the roof, or are you going to have all your loading down on the ground and you're going to force people to use that vertical circulation? How do your FSR exclusions work? There's so many different aspects as soon as you take it from that traditional sort of single story model to I say traditional, and I'll get back to that point in a second, traditional in our lifetime.
Right.
It becomes a little bit more complex, and you really have to think it out. And we did a ton of research. We talked to a lot of our tenants. We talked to a lot of our peers in the industry. Went and looked at a few. There's a few of these types of assets that are operating. I think of the Prologis development south of the border. I do think that that is one of the only ways in the interim that we will be dealing with the shortage of land on the industrial side. I think long term, we need to be having deeper levels of conversation about the agricultural land reserve and the whole sort of economic industrial land and how it contributes to the economy. Yeah. I don't think we're having a robust enough conversation in that regard. And I don't mean like tear up all the farms and build warehouses. I don't mean that at all. But, one of the interesting sort of ironies that I like to talk about is, I mentioned to you earlier, I was born and raised in Whistler, and Whistler and Pemberton were one community, and Pemberton is a sort of a agriculture and forestry community. And I grew up, hanging out on lots of my friends' farms and stuff like that. And I can tell you what goes on those farms in many cases is a lot dirtier than what goes on in our warehouse sites.
Right.
So in terms of like tractor oil leaking into the soil and pesticides and all this kind of stuff, like our warehouse operations are clean.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I think that there's a long-term or a conversation that really we need to engage in and really go deep. And it's a hard conversation to have politically and otherwise. Going back to that comment about tradition and traditional forms of industrial, if we go back to like early 1900s, late 1800s or whatever, and we go to Chicago, we go to Boston, we go to New York, stacked industrial, that's all they knew, right? You go to the ports and you had these old warehouse buildings that were 3, 4, 7, 8 stories with big freight elevators going vertical up and down. And I think that, we need to probably I think you're going to start to see a bit of a renaissance of that perhaps. And I think we really need to start thinking about that. And you're starting to see that in Mount Pleasant and the Falls Creek Flats in the city of Vancouver with the I zones, I1 and I2, where we're starting to really think out vertical industrial. And I don't mean like warehousing distribution, but industrial type uses that are starting to become a little bit more flexible, but they're stacked on many levels. So that's what I think about multi-level industrial. Geez, I feel like I'm really long-winded with my answers, but
no, it's great. I'm interested to see too, like how Coquitlam goes, how Oxford goes. I think obviously the key is got to be it's typically closer into the core, into the city for it to make the economics to make sense. Because my understanding is it costs more per square foot, even when you spread it over 2 levels to build, significantly more. And so you're going to have to see really high rental rates to make sense of it economically, I think, or have a historical land base that's quite a ways old.
Yeah, I think you're going to see it predominantly in kind of last mile. That said, the stuff we're doing in Coquitlam, it's distribution mostly, probably, and warehousing on the main floor, and then small bay on the second floor, and we have truck access up to the second floor for those small bay users. So we're kind of playing in 2 markets there, on one site, by design. So last mile, I think you're going to predominantly see this sort of multi-level industrial format, but I do think you'll see some of it on sites that can handle it in larger warehouse kind of distribution format.
Yeah, for sure.
Outside of the last mile.
Cool. Well, for my last question, crystal ball prediction time. I mentioned I watched the UDI thing, and the first question was, what do you think the biggest risk to the real estate market is going to be globally this year? And I think COVID had just left Wuhan that week, and nobody predicted a global pandemic. But here we are. Obviously we touched on every different asset class, but for the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months, where are you focusing your energy and time from an acquisition standpoint? Like, what's your priority? And what are your thoughts overall on the Vancouver and local real estate market for the next year or two?
So right now, in terms of acquisitions, I would say our priority is sort of being patient, because you're starting to see some distress out there. You're starting to see some cracks in the system. There's a lot of foreign capital that came into our market, and in terms of investment, right? I'm not talking about buying single family homes and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about foreign capital in investment in real estate development opportunities.
Yeah.
And I think that, we operate in a very complex, nuanced market here in Vancouver, and I would call it one of the most advanced real estate markets in the world. and so we're starting to see some of that fracture now, right? Because it's harder, the market changed, it's not as robust, it's not as hot. There was a ton of government intervention, and then now, like you said, we have COVID. So we're really kind of trying to be patient to see what comes of all of that in terms of an acquisition strategy, and looking at distressed opportunities and things like that. We, as a matter of strategy, we don't really participate in a lot of the tenders that go on out there, the competitive bidding processes. We've I think spent about $500 million in acquisitions over the last 5-6 years, and not one of those has been a bid tender process. I would say almost 95% of that has been private. So that's kind of how we operate in terms of acquisitions. In terms of the Vancouver real estate market over the next 1 to 2 years, it was actually Peter Wessick that he mentioned this is if you look at some of the largest cities in the world, and if you kind of treat them like a company, and then you look at their performance over some of the largest indexes in the world, the Dow Jones, NASDAQ, or whatever, these cities have they've generally outperformed those indexes. And so if you think about it that way, and you think about Vancouver in the long term, it really has a lot going for it. And we're a desirable place to be. We have stable land laws. I operated very briefly in Vietnam with Ani. We opened an office there and closed it in the same year. But you want to talk about stability in terms of the banking system and the land title system, right? So we have a very stable banking system, as evidenced coming out of 07, 08. We have a very stable land title system. We have rule of law, although in the last couple of years with these levels of government, some of that's been called into question, but still on a worldwide basis, I would say we have stability and a lot of it. And that coupled with, our natural beauty here, our sort of, growing economy, I believe in Vancouver over the long term, and I always will. And I would say that goes for all market segments, save and except for the retail like we talked about. But I think that these dynamics will support a robust and stable real estate market into the future. I don't know how, we have to deal with the commoditization of housing. We have to think about that. We have to talk about that. I certainly would prefer to operate in a more stable real estate market where we are bringing product to market. We are selling it out at a pace. We are building it, we are delivering it, and we're moving on to the next one. Yeah. I would rather not sell a project out in a weekend and, just have this frenzy. I don't think that is a healthy place to be, or I don't think it's sustainable. So that's a conversation that we need to have with ourselves. But again, certainly in the next 1 to 2 years and over the long term, I'm a big believer in our market. And I say Vancouver, I mean Greater Vancouver. Yeah. So that's kind of how I feel. We'll see.
I think we'll end it on that with a we'll see, because I think we will see in the next year will be interesting. But I totally agree with you. Born and raised in Vancouver, right in the heart of it, outside of Granville Island, and I'm a massive fan of this city and always will be. And I think that if anything, this pandemic has shed light, to anybody paying attention to here on how great of a place this is to live. Whether it's how we handled the pandemic as a nation and as a province, or whether it's, the fact that we can go outside despite the rain and enjoy the beauty, while being socially distanced. So I think this is a fantastic place to live and operate. And I think that going forward, we're going to do well. So, but with that, thank you so much for your time. That was incredibly insightful and hugely valuable to me. So I think our audience will find the same, and I really appreciate your time.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
Cheers.